This goes on continuously. You're never satisfied with your ability to do this, and that's to be expected. You'll never be satisfied until you experience perfection. But every time you make this effort, you will begin to find the way yourself. But while you're making that effort, who do you think there is that's helping you? Who? The greatest power, the only real power in creation, wanting to give you that. What does Baba say? I love you more than you can ever love yourself. Here is that force, the source of all creation, wanting to give you infinite bliss. Don't you see? Which means that the more you put your mind on Baba and what he stands for, you start out here in a total external part of this edifice. And then your thoughts begin to preoccupy itself. And then gradually the thoughts become increasingly intriguing for you about Baba. It's like entering this edifice. And when you enter this edifice, you begin to find things that are filled with wonder. The externality of first thinking about Baba is somewhat bland and neutral. But then little by little your thoughts ruminate over what he stands for. And you're withdrawn out of your small petty preoccupations. You're drawn into the center of this edifice, or more inside this edifice. And what you see then begins to carry its own momentum. You don't have to try to think about him anymore. You're conscious. Why? Because that's what you are. You see, Baba is your reality. It's impossible. Every time you look for something that gives you pleasure, love, no matter how shallow the level we're talking about, that motivation comes from the deeper reality that you are, that wants infinite divine love, infinite oneness, the abiding reality in the midst of constant change. That's what you are. It's impossible that an individual in time would not succumb to Baba. It's impossible, because he is totally the goal, and he as the goal represents the reality of each one of us, the thing we have been searching throughout time for. So it's impossible that when we see him with any degree of understanding, that we would not be drawn to him. Impossible. So Baba says, try, because I've given you that gift, that you believe in me with all of your weaknesses, with all of your stupidity, with all of your foolishness. You still hold in that shack of your home. You hold a priceless possession. You are conscious of it. That's the big difference between one and the other who doesn't have it. You know you have this priceless possession. Stop preoccupying yourself with all of these things that not only have less importance, but really have no importance. Our sleep state gives something that is nothing importance. Someone has whispered the golden words in our ear while we're in this deep sleep. That's that gift. It's possible to turn your head from the direction of millions of lifetimes into this direction. It is possible. So although that seems very long and difficult to us, we have to begin to see what is really true. It's not long and difficult. If it's possible in a very short time to experience consciously thoughts that are very important because they focus on the symbol of reality, the God-man, how can that be long? Otherwise, without that conviction, it would be impossible to turn your attention. It would be impossible to even begin to become intrigued by the mysteriousness. It would become impossible for this exalted idea not only to begin to counterbalance all of our attachment to the world, but actually to begin to make it disappear as a value for us. So Baba says, with me, your spiritual progress is slow. Without me, it's impossible. Those words have to be understood down to the depth of our understanding. So much so that the enormous good fortune we have becomes what we more and more and more and more become preoccupied with, not the burdens, but the enormous good fortune, while ultimately securing this magnificent freedom. And that's all Baba wants. That's the purpose of the avatar, to bring about the end of your suffering, which means the end of your ignorance. It can only happen through the God-man, because the God-man is the most magnificent presence of God for this crippled, limited consciousness, addicted consciousness that we experience now. Something that magnificent has to come within the realm of this dream. That with all of the din of illusion stands increasingly alone, separate, and draws us. Baba says, your conviction about me has to become absolute. That's our work. It doesn't happen like that. Nothing that I know of happens like that. Even Baba says, when you see someone born and all of a sudden at a certain point, he seems to become so spiritually awakened, so spiritually aware. The preparation was there in his previous lives. That's all. So this is a gradual thing. But the conviction must become absolute. And that can only come the more we think about Baba. You heard what he said, what he does. Thoughts. He takes this love song, this little positiveness that we say, oh, what a weak effort on my part to move from a negative thought to a positive thought. Baba is the source of all positive thoughts. You say to yourself, I haven't done anything. But you don't know that he's taken that positive thought and transmitted it throughout creation. That's what he does with his family. He takes all their struggles to go from negativity to positiveness, and he amplifies them and broadcasts them to the entire creation. But the most important thing, of course, beside his spiritual work, the most important thing is how we ourselves manage to become unslaved. So he says, the more you think about me, that channel, it's the channel between you and your own higher self. That channel can only be deepened and be direct in terms of flowing from you to God through the God-man. So the more we think about Baba, the more he is able to give us. And also in that discourse was the fact, which is always repeated by people whose function is not the function of the avatar, perfect masters. They always try to minimize our suffering. Always. If there are two events that both will result in an experience that causes further advancement in our understanding, the one that hurts us the least is the one that's going to be used. Because the one thing we want to do is to feel Baba's constant presence. Very real, very formidable. That expression that Baba used one time, when you're not thinking about me, you're vulnerable. That has to be absolutely understood in its literal sense, because it is absolutely true. But when we see it, obviously, the more we see the truth of it, the more we will be definitely motivated to making a greater effort to think of him. And with that kind of motivation, because we do understand more, we will be thinking about him in a different way, a more meaningful way. I am closer to you than your own breath must become more than words, and they will become more than words. There's no question about it. The inevitability of having belief in someone who is God-realized. The God-realized person helps creation, he helps the individual. He helps creation indirectly, that is to say, all the other individuals who do not know about him, he affects them indirectly. But the individual who is consciously aware of the God-man focuses on him, tries to make that incredible fact of existence, the total reality in human form, tries to comprehend that, to bring that within some kind of a working relationship with the thoughts that the individual has. I have thoughts. Here is this staggering fact. How does my conscious mind, with its usual preoccupation with thoughts, deal with this staggering fact? Well, the fact has to become more and more staggering. When it becomes more and more staggering, there's less and less difficulty in dealing with it. And Baba says, and ultimately love, he said. Do you remember those statements that Baba made? Certain instructions or admonitions. Do this, do that, do this, don't do that, don't do this. And then the next to the last one he said, and try to love me. But the last thing he said was, but if you cannot, do not worry because I love you. See? I can't even conceive of anybody who is as broad-minded as that. I mean, everything about Baba is enough to make you really draw close to him. My first experience, what an overwhelming friend. Really friend. When I used to think about Baba and I used to think about the word friend, every hair on my body stood up. Friend. When I thought of Baba as the friend, I didn't even know that spiritual aspirants like Rumi used the word friend when he was referring to God.